Jeev Gachdana is Mr. Jarlath Burns, and you're very welcome to Croke Park for this very special GAA history podcast, the GAA founding a movement. Today, we're going to explore the formative years of the association by using some historical documents from 1884 to 1891, which are held in the GAA Museum. Think of it being like the GAA's very own Big Bang Theory. So I'm delighted to be joined here by Ger O'Sullivan and Kevin McCarthy, two men who have devoted years to the study and teaching of Irish history, and our very own Julianne McCaig, who's the education manager in the GAA Museum. So Kevin's a very proud Waterford man, a noted sports historian, and an authority on the Olympic Games and the Tailteann Games. And Ger combines his passion for history with his role as communications officer for Cumulú Scale Corkig, and has been a key figure in the development of history in Irish second level schools in his role as acting director for curriculum assessment in the National Council for Curriculum Assessment. Julianne is from Offaly and comes from a family steeped in the GAA history. And for many years, as we know, you've been a senior member of the multi-award winning team at the GAA Museum at Croke Park. And I have to say, this is the management room that we're in, Custabanisteachta, as we call it. And if you look to my right, for those watching on the podcast, you see all of the presidents of the GAA, starting off with Maurice Davin. And on the back here to my left, you see the 15 Ards Dúrthóirí of Cumulú Scale, starting off with Michael Cusack and ending with Tom Ryan. So I have to say, when I meet Tom, or we have meetings in this management room, you always feel the responsibility and accountability of these great, eminent people looking down on you. So, Julianne, I know that you took these documents up this morning. First time I've ever seen them. First time I'm sure lots of people have seen them. You have been watching them over them, so like little eggs. Nobody's allowed to have any water around them. They are very, very precious. And maybe you might like to introduce the first document for us.
Gurma Gathuk Throne. I'm delighted to introduce the first letter. It is from 1884. It's the letter that started it all, really. It's from Michael Cusack to Maurice Davin, suggesting the first meeting of the GAA.
So, Kevin, maybe you might read it for us.
Yeah, the extract that I picked, Charlotte, reads as follows. The Irish Association with its members must be formed before the end of the year. The association could organise the whole country within the year 1885. We could then safely hold the projected national gathering in 1886. The business must be worked from Munster. Suppose we held a meeting of delegates in some central place in Tipperary on the 1st of November next. Don't bother your head about Dublin. The place couldn't well be worse than it is. We'll have to look to the provinces for men. Dublin will have to fall in or keep up the connection with England.
Don't bother your head about Dublin. Uncontroversial as usual, Michael Cusack. So, Kevin, why was getting Davin involved so important to Cusack, do you think?
Davin was the absolute celebrity of Irish sport in an awful lot of respects, you know. He was retired at this stage as a sportsman, but he had been a world famous athlete as well as an oarsman, bare knuckle boxer, all sorts of things like that. It's no exaggeration whatsoever to say that he was the most well-known figure in any form of Irish sport, you know. I suppose Davin also was important in that he was a moderate man. He was a man known for being very easy to get on with, very tolerant, and maybe Cusack himself understood that he wasn't so easygoing, you know. So from that point of view, Davin was perfect to approach in that respect, you know. Just to give you an example, I mean, I've seen a book recently where Davin, the chapter on Davin was called Father of Irish Athletics. That's literally what he was regarded as. He had competed against English athletes and carried them on his shoulders around stadia and so on, you know. So the other thing that struck me is that Cusack wouldn't have known it, but ultimately Davin would also turn out to be a very important figure because the Davins had a field near where they lived in Deer Park, and that became a venue for at least 2 All-Ireland finals subsequently, you know. So in all those ways, Davin was a very important figure.
And I suppose it's important for people to realise, listen to this podcast, that the Gaelic Athletic Association, it wasn't just hurling and football and handball and rounders, but the whole gambit of Irish athletics as well, that they were trying to make more indigenous. And Ger, why do you think Cusack was optimistic about Munster but not Dublin?
Yeah, the extract, I suppose, gives us an insight into Cusack's combative character, and we can see that he's quite combative in his views on Dublin, and that relates to what he saw as, I suppose, one of the effects of Anglicisation, whereby a rising Catholic middle class in Dublin viewed social advancement and social preferment as essential. And in that context, you saw the emergence of rugby in schools and universities. Soccer followed as well. And Cusack came to see sport as a means by which that middle class was seeking advancement and seeking preferment. And he came to view, even though he played rugby himself and played cricket and as well as other sports, he formed a view that this chasing of advancement was to the detriment of native Irish traditions and sports. And in particular, he had in his sights the athletics movement in Dublin, which he saw as, if you like, mimicking what was happening in England. And he was disillusioned as well, I think, by the fact that when he first set up a hurling club in Dublin, it didn't last too long. He set up a second one and formed contacts with people in Munster and in Galway. And it's there that he saw, I suppose, more fertile ground for the development of that association.
I think it was Paul Royster, an historian, said that Cusack could only be a part of a committee of one. He was a very combative person, difficult to get on with.
He was indeed.
And do you think that Cusack's optimism proved justified?
Well, certainly in the short term, there were some really positive developments. It was said that the GAA spread like a prairie fire following its initial meeting, and I suppose the fact that he secured the patronage of such authoritative and luminous figures as Archbishop Croke and Davitt and the presidency of Davin. I mean, they were really significant statements. And you saw as well very quickly the codification of rules following in 1887. You had the first Ireland finals played in 1887. But there were also some red lights in the horizon, if you like, whereby some trouble was in store. Again, his character was part of it. He was a very combative figure, very difficult to get on with, and his own personality didn't help in some instances, particularly an almost vendetta-like view of some people in the Dublin athletics movement. Also, there were problems later on around funding, so initially quite positive, but certainly an IRB and Fenian connections to come as well.
Infiltrating
problems, yeah.
So Gurmahagov, very, very interesting in that first extract. So we're going to look now to a second extract from that letter to Maurice Davin on the 26th of August 1884. Julianne, do you just want to maybe introduce it? I know it's the same letter, but just tell us a wee bit about how you look after it in the museum.
Yeah, I suppose it's an interesting part of museums that maybe people don't think about too often, is how you manage and mind paper particularly, because it's sensitive to light and temperature. So this letter is on long-term loan to the GAA Museum, and it's on permanent display in our ground floor exhibition, which explores the kind of birth of the GAA. We would be monitoring it. Adam Staunton, our archivist, would have temperature controls, which he monitors. He can monitor digitally now. It's all changed. And then some documents will actually go in and out because they can't be exposed to light for too long. This one does stay in the museum. But it's interesting because archives will change now. If we were founding a sporting organisation today, we wouldn't probably have a handwritten letter. It would be an email. So the fact that we have this to look at, the writing, the spelling, the style, even the paper and the formality of it, it's just a real exciting glimpse into the history of, the whole association. This really started it all. So for history geeks like all of us, this is really exciting to be beside it today.
And you would imagine that the first thing they would have done in Thurles was set up a WhatsApp group.
Yeah.
And there would have been lots of emojis and thumbs up, but they didn't have that sort of technology at the time. So we're going to move on now. I will read this extract. So it's from Michael Cusack's letter to Maurice Davin, 26th of August 1884. And I have to say, it is quite turgid, very, very intense, very dense type of script, completely different to how people write nowadays. The paragraphs on athletics in United Ireland are like exploding like shells in the enemy's ranks. Of course they know what is my doing, and therefore the paper is not likely to hang fire soon. I found it to be utterly hopeless to revive our national pastimes without the assistance of the leaders of the people, and I have not hesitated to urge my claim with a persistence that brooks no refusal. After a protracted struggle, I won all round. Our business now is to work together, caring for none but the Irish people and quietly shoving aside all who would denationalise these people. Shades of Make Ireland Great Again coming through in the themes in that letter. So any observations on Cusack's use of language here and what it shows of his personality, Ger?
Yeah, Ron, you can see in the extract, which, by the way, comes from the United Ireland newspaper, which was favourable to Parnell, so nationalist newspaper. But you can see even the use of language like exploding like shells in the enemy's ranks, hang fire soon, quite militaristic language, combative language. And it's a really good insight into the kind of person that he was. Also, note that he talks about having a persistence that brooks no refusal and a protracted struggle. He's a character who seems to relish the fight, so to speak. And this is evident as well in some of his subsequent pronouncements. When he fell out with the GAA, he used similar, very emotive, combative language in referring to the executive. And that level of vitriolic language was also evident subsequently when he insulted Croke and caused something of an issue where he was, in fact, forced to make an apology to Archbishop Croke subsequently. One interesting coda to this is that in Ulysses by James Joyce, there is a character called the Citizen, which was modelled on Cusack, an aggressive, outspoken, even somewhat flamboyantly dressed character who was known for his aggressive and xenophobic views. So I think all of this illustrates the kind of person that he was. He was a great man to organise, and some of the initial success in the early days was down to his travelling around, his organising, but unfortunately that combative, stubborn streak in his personality also caused problems, as we can see.
Okay, Guramahagat, very, very insightful there. And Kevin, he refers there to the leaders of the people, and who were those leaders of the people and what did they represent, and who were the people Cusack felt were trying to denationalise Ireland? And I'm assuming that denationalise is that used in a different context to the one that we would use, nationalising and denationalising.
Yeah,
just give us a wee insight into that.
Yeah, I suppose denationalise would have meant anglicise in Cusack's mind, you know. I mean, he was, in the days before social influencers and so on, and in the days before independence, he was thinking of, for example, Parnell, the leader of the Home Rule movement. He was also very conscious that the leader of the Catholic Church, or a leader at least of the Catholic Church, would need to be approached. So that's where Croke comes in. And you also have Michael Davitt, who would have been the central figure in the formation of the Land League. And bear in mind that in 1884, we're only 5 years after the formation of the Land League. So that whole issue of tenant rights and land acts and so on is a very, very strong part of Irish life in rural society particularly, you know. Those trying to denationalise Ireland, to a certain extent, it could be anybody who didn't agree with Cusack, if I could be catty about it. Tories particularly, the landlords who control so much of society. Cusack would have had a particular concern about bodies like the British Amateur Athletic Association, which had its own set of rules and was becoming very well organised in a lot of respects. In Cusack's case, again, he was a native Irish speaker, so that language, the school system, the civil service, as I say, take your pick. These were all elements of the continuing anglicisation of Irish society as he saw it. You know,
lots of people to fight with there, which I'm sure
was
his national pastime.
And add in the police and military as well.
Of course, yeah. So Rahma Jarai and Ishkaji and Trihu Pisa and Trihu Alt, and this is from an article from Michael Cusack entitled "A Word About Irish Athletics." Julianne, you just want to say a few words about it there?
Yeah, this is actually a newspaper article, so we don't house these in the museum, but we rely on them a lot, I suppose, for our education piece. So we produce an education pack for secondary schools, and newspapers for researchers are obviously a huge source of, society information on society at the time. And this is a particularly famous article. So all teachers and history groups that come to the school know about this article, and it's one we're proud to showcase. And anyone who wants to download the full education pack, we have it there on the museum website as well. So it's a great resource, and we hope lots of people will use it.
Thank you very much, Julianne. So I'm going to invite Jareth now maybe to read an extract from that article, Jareth.
2 years ago, every man who did not make his living either wholly or partly by athletics was allowed to compete. But with this concession came a law which is as intolerable as its existence in Ireland is degrading. The law is that all athletic meetings should be held under the rules of the Amateur Athletic Association of England, and that no person competing should be ineligible to compete elsewhere. The management of nearly all the meetings held in Ireland since has been entrusted to persons hostile to all the dearest aspirations of the Irish people.
Thank you, Jarlath. Again, an interesting insight, I think, into Cusack's personality. His reference to those hostile to all the dearest aspirations of the Irish people. Jarlath, can you maybe elaborate on who were these people that he considered to be hostile, and was it a fair view?
I think initially it's, if you look at the context in which he writes, it's the Amateur Athletic Association of England and those people who would have been organising under that banner. But as we know, Cusack had lots of hostility to give out to lots of people. And if you look at his persona, he was a fluent Irish speaker. It would have been the people who would have been trying to foist the English language on the Irish people. Conradh na Gaeilge was set up 9 years later in 1893. Obviously then with his friendship with David. 1879, you had the Land League. So all of those people swirling around in that maelstrom, there were lots of people to be hostile towards if you were Michael Cusack, I would imagine.
Thank you, Jarlath. And Kevin, you spoke about Davin. From what you know of Davin, did he share Cusack's views as set out in this piece?
I think in general, yes, Jar, but certainly the more aggressive views that Cusack would have had, Davin would have had difficulty with. I mean, Davin actually felt and put in print that the rules of the British 3As was a good place to start when it came to looking at rules. I'd also suggest that Davin would not have had anything like the same concern about the ban, for instance, that Cusack would have had. You know, Davin was used to dealing with English sporting organisations and so on, and didn't feel the same threat or the same hostility towards them that people like Cusack would have done, you know.
Kevin, maybe just before we move on, a very brief word about the impact of Cusack's views when the GAA was established first.
Yeah, I mean, his force of nature itself was so important, you know. I mean, with the very first athletics meeting of the GAA coincided with a 3A's meeting in Tralee. And Cusack went to Tralee and he did everything possible to help the local organisers, and the GAA athletics meeting was a huge success, whereas there was only a handful at the other one, which was held on the same day, you know. He did promote division. There's no doubt about that. Anybody with extreme views is going to give rise to opposition as well, you know. There's no doubt about that whatsoever.
A different character to Davin in that respect.
Different character, you know, but you have to give him credit because he did, I won't say single-handedly, but he did an awful lot to drive hurling and football as games. You know, he was really passionate in that respect. And as was said earlier, even before the GAA was founded, Cusack was trying to establish hurling clubs and matches and so on, you know. So, and I mean, the years up to 1891, with or without Cusack, were going to be challenging ones financially and in all sorts of other ways, you know. So,
thanks, Kevin. We're going to actually look at another extract from that very same article, which Jarlath is going to read for us again, and we'll pick it up again.
Okay, Garmahagat, Gerard, we tell the Irish people to take the management of their games into their own hands, to encourage and promote in every way every form of athletics which is peculiarly Irish, and to remove at one sweep everything foreign and iniquitous in the present system. The vast majority of the best athletes are nationalists. These gentlemen should take the matter into their hands at once and draft laws for the guidance of the promoters of meetings in Ireland next year.
Thanks, Jarlath. Just an observation from me on that. It's interesting that he doesn't mention explicitly hurling and football, actually, in that instance. And of course, it is the case that, and we've averted this already, that he did envisage a wider range of athletic endeavours as coming under the aegis of the GAA. And he was quite proficient as an athlete himself in such disciplines as, I think, weight throwing and shot put and so on. And as we mentioned, he played cricket and rugby even earlier as well. I think an interesting observation on this is that going back to his ideas around the social status or class of different sports. I think he was annoyed at what he saw as the exclusion of working men, labourers, artisans from athletics as they were arranged in Dublin at the time. And there's an interesting, I think, reference that he makes elsewhere in that piece around lamenting the demise of trysting at the crossroads and on the hurling fields. Almost brings to mind De Valera's evocation of romantic Ireland dancing at the crossroads, so to speak. And Kevin, just one thing as well that you might just comment on. I think he abhorred as well what he saw as professionalism, people making money out of athletics.
Yeah, that became a huge factor in the development of athletics, not just in Ireland, to be honest with you. You had a lot of gambling and based on handicapping of athletics and so on. So it was a very. The other thing that struck me, Ger, is that one of Cusack's concerns and one of Croke's concerns eventually was that 3A's athletics meetings were generally held on Saturdays. And the only day that most people in rural Ireland had available was Sundays. So that was another issue that struck them, But
maybe, Jared, I might just come back to you. There's a really striking reference by him to what he considered to be things foreign and iniquitous in the present system. Do you want to just comment on that maybe and give us some context?
Yeah, I think Kevin has referred to it as well there. Obviously the handicapping was something that he was totally against because that led on to gambling, which he was totally against. And of course then having those meetings on a Saturday meant that the ordinary worker couldn't take part, and they were quintessentially English, which he was trying to move on. He felt at all times that why can't we in Ireland organise games which are more reflective of the Irish persona rather than the English persona? And going back to this term that he always used, national pastimes. Let's take control of our own national pastimes.
And the use of iniquitous and foreign together is just an interesting insight too, isn't it?
Well, he would link one with the other, of course, with his antipathy towards everything that was English.
Sure. Thank you very much, Jerry. Kevin, I might ask you about the absence of any reference to women's sport in our conversation so far.
Yeah, Jaron, first of all, I better fess up as the very happy environment officer of Capcoin Camogie Club in County Waterford. But we've got to be careful that we don't read a 19th century document with 21st century values. This is misogyny by any other name. It's all about gentlemen and so on, but it's a societal misogyny. It's not just the GAA or Cusack or anybody else, women didn't have the right to vote. They didn't have the right to own property. They barely had the right to work at this time, so it's not that surprising. Contemporary sources will tell you that a lot of men were concerned that women would physically be unable, would be unhealthy for them to take part in sporting activity. But if you look beyond Ireland, and I'm not defending the GAA or anybody at all, but look beyond Ireland, the Olympics didn't allow women in 1896 when they were staged. The British 3As that we've been talking about didn't allow women competitors till the 1920s. Okay? I think I'm right in saying that it was the Paris Olympics of 2024 that first allowed the same amount of events for women as for men. So that's the way it was, wrong as it might feel now. What is interesting is that I did discover on a tangent at one stage that a professional women's soccer match was staged in the 1890s in a place in the north of Dublin called Morris Butterley's Field, which is nowadays better known, Jarlath, as
Park Croquig.
Yep. So there's one for
interesting,
you.
yeah.
And on that bombshell.
Another illustration of how rich these documents are, depending on the questions we ask of them, insights into the place of women in society, and very different to the way things are today.
100%. I'm just thinking as you're chatting there, I would imagine, I don't have exact figures, but the primary and secondary school visitors would be 50-50 boys and girls that come into us every day, which is amazing. But even since I've started in the museum about 18 years ago, we've been really working on enhancing, women representation representation in the museum. One of my favourite things in the collection is Kay Mills medals, which I think are amazing, and she's a great figure. And we also, you know, when we show our film at the start, we include the women's finals now, which like it should have been done sooner, but at least it is done now. And I know there is work to do, and I look at all the men behind me here, you know, there is work to do, but it has moved on, and there's some funny things. We have a replica of the old camogie uniform in the museum, which is hugely popular. You know, it's a long skirt, and one of the rules of camogie used to be that you couldn't interfere with the ball with your skirt. It was that long. So the kids today, the girls in particular, think that is crazy, that, you know, that they would have to wear that. So it's good to remember as well, like, we have come far. There's obviously a lot to do, but from our point of view, this is part of the history, and telling this story of integration now is part of it.
Great historical perspective on that. And our next document, we're going to move from looking at the founders to the role of some patrons.
We're going to move from looking at Cusack and Davin onto some of the patrons who became involved in the GAA. And Julianne, I understand you have another facsimile of a document that the museum has that you can tell us a little bit about.
Yeah, these are really interesting, the next couple of documents. They are letters, but they're letters that appeared publicly, so they were written in newspapers. The first one is from Croke, and it's responding to the invitation to act as the patron of the GAA from The Nation on the 27th of December 1884. I think it's kind of interesting. It's nearly like the social media of today, where you're talking publicly, but it's a conversation between two people, but they obviously want everybody to see it. So it did kind of remind me of, you know, people calling each other out on Twitter or something like that.
Oh, okay, excellent. Gerard, would you read that for us?
Sure.
An extract from it, at least, that you're comfortable with?
Yeah, so an extract from a letter from Archbishop Croke to Michael Cusack, indicating his acceptance of the role of patron. And he says, "One of the most painful, let me assure you, and at the same time one of the most frequently recurring reflections that, as an Irishman, I am compelled to make in connection with the present aspect of things in this country, is derived from the ugly and irritating fact that we are daily importing from England not only her manufactured goods, which has practically strangled our own manufacturing appliances, but, together with her fashions, her accent, her vicious literature, her music, her dances, and her manifold mannerisms, her games, also her pastimes, to the utter discredit of our own grand national sports, and the sore humiliation, as I believe, of every genuine son and daughter of the old land. Ball playing, hurling, football, kicking according to Irish rules, and all such favourite exercises and amusements amongst men and boys may now be said to be not only dead and buried, but in several localities to be entirely forgotten and unknown."
Thanks, Ger. It strikes me that thinking about documents, skills, analysis and so on, being able to compare what you learn from one document to another document is a very, very important thing to be able to do. You know, Ger, for instance, I mean, how do you think Croke's argument there for a national sporting organisation differs from what we saw of Cusack's?
Yeah, I suppose one initial observation is that it's probably a little less strident or angry than Cusack, who seems, as I said earlier, to have had certain people in his sights. This document reads almost like a lament for the passing of an idealised Ireland and its replacement, as Croke says, with a range of imported practices from England. It's interesting that he actually refers as well to industry and the impact of imports into Ireland on our own manufacturing industry. An interesting observation from him. But when he talks about things like the sore humiliation of our people, there's a real sense that he's lamenting maybe, as I said, a past that's gone. It's also interesting that he refers to things like literature and music and dance. Maybe there's a sort of moral aspect to his concerns there that we didn't see necessarily in Cusack, which was probably more of a patriotic stance, shall we say. But at the same time, obviously, both are in the same hymn sheet in terms of where they see the problem being, which is the dominance of English culture.
Yeah, there's a huge resonance even with the poetry of Yeats and some of the fishermen and poems like that, you know. Charlotte, do you think Croke's vision is a broader one than Cusack's?
It probably is, and in order to fully understand that, you have to look at the lens through which both of these protagonists viewed the world. Obviously, Cusack had his own lens. He was looking at national pastimes only. Croke, being a member of the hierarchy, he would have had a different type of lens, and he would have had concern to what people were reading, what people were listening to in terms of music, the dances. And it's interesting that they mention the dances, because if you look at subsequent documents throughout the history of Ireland, particularly in the book by the Cronin and Rouse, they demonstrate documents which show that GAA clubs had this difficulty as well with even fundraising or watching their members going to do foreign dances elsewhere. And if you contrast that then to the modern day, where one of the biggest fundraisers that GAA clubs have is Strictly Come Dancings and discos and all of that. So it shows how we have become more confident as a nation as the time has moved on, and we have been able to embrace all of that culture while still maintaining our own culture.
Yeah, it strikes me as well, funnily enough, that the great athlete of the late 19th century, GAA man as well, Tom Kiley, would attend a sports meeting, win 5 or 6 events, but invariably would stay around and take part in the Irish dancing competition as well. You know, it also strikes me that we've been talking about the games. You know, I mean, nowadays obviously everybody thinks hurling and football and handball and even rounders and so on. You know, but that the athletics events that Croke was lamenting and that Cusack spoke about, the Irish were particularly strong. The GAA athletes were particularly strong at things like weight throwing and jumping. One of the reasons why they disliked the 3As in Britain was that the 3As were promoting running and that sort of stuff. Javelin throwing, discus throwing. The Irish preferred heavy weights. And maybe it's a little bit after the time, but an awful lot of the great athletes that populated Olympic weight throwing were actually not alone Irish, they were GAA people. I mean, for instance, John Flanagan, who won the hammer at the Olympics in 1900, 1904 and 1908, was from J.P. McManus's parish in Limerick and managed to play interprovincial hurling and football and break a world hammer throwing record all in one day in 1896. And you had ultimately 7 of the first 8 Olympic titles won in the hammer were won by people from either Cork, Limerick or Tipperary.
Munster again.
Munster, the Golden Veil. That's what where back to Cusack, talking about the
an emphasis on strength,
absolutely,
personal strength in all of those.
Absolutely. Yeah. If we had a second extract, Ger, from that document, is there one that would strike you?
Yeah. Let me read this extract. So Croke goes on to say, "No doubt there is something pleasing to the eye in the get-up of a modern young man who, arrayed in light attire with parti-coloured cap on and racket in hand, is making his way, with or without companion, to the tennis ground. But, for my part, I should vastly prefer to behold or think of the youthful athletes whom I used to see in my early days at fair and pattern, bereft of shoes and coat, and thus prepared to play handball, to fly over any number of horses, to throw the sledge or winding stone, and to test each other's mettle and activity by the trying ordeal of 3 leaps or a hop, step and a jump."
Yeah, you have to smile, I think, at Croke's use of language here. What do you think, Jared? He's not a tennis fan.
Yeah, you can see he's very opinionated. He has exquisite prejudices. He's very negative towards it. But it comes back to the point that you made from the last extract about the type of things that he valued in terms of sport, racking and tearing and lifting and throwing and demonstrations of strength, as opposed to the finer points of dressing up to play tennis, in particular in light attire, which I think would have really fed into his prejudices. I can tell you, I know that Cusack was very well known for walking around Dublin and demonstrating his portly figure. I wouldn't have liked to have been one of those tennis people heading off racket in hand with light attire, party-coloured cap on, and meeting Cusack on the way with the big stick, as evidence in the statue of him just at the back of the Cusack stand there.
Yeah. But again, Jerry, is there something deeper? I mean, is there, for example, the possibility of religious motives behind Croke's?
Yeah, I think one of the real, I suppose, overarching contextual developments at this time in Ireland was the consolidation of Catholic identity in the country, and the association of Catholicism with Irishness, with Gaelicism,
with de-Anglicisation association, yeah.
I think even in other extracts from this letter, which this letter has become in many ways a charter of the GAA, it's just a seminal document, a foundational document. In other parts of it, you have Croke talking about the effacing of our national identity, and he uses that almost emotive term of forefathers, thinking back to our forefathers. It almost reminds you of faith of our fathers. Again, this association of Catholicism with Irishness, and even going back to that previous extract we read, his concern around maybe a perceived moral corruption by importing these iniquitous, as the term was used in another document earlier, practices. And I think where he is similar again to Cusack is this idea that the Protestant ascendancy maybe of a previous generation has been replaced by this new class of Irish people. And his concern is that, I think, and perhaps one of his motivations for becoming patron was that he could help to lead a sort of a revival or rejuvenation of Catholicism as much as Irishness, because the two were very much seen as intertwined.
Okay, good stuff. Julianne, I noticed that you've got another document in front of you there.
Yeah, it's from the same secondary school education pack, and it's another letter in response to Cusack's invitation to be a patron of the GAA, this time from Parnell. What's very striking is it's a lot shorter. So I don't know if that's an indication of personality or what, but it's quite interesting.
Well, if it's shorter, I'll read it, so that's okay. It gives me great pleasure to learn that a Gaelic Athletic Association has been established for the preservation of national pastimes, with the objects of which I entirely concur. This letter, by the way, is from Charles Stewart Parnell, writing back to Michael Cusack. I feel much honoured by the resolution adopted at the Thurles meeting, and I accept with appreciation the position of patron of the association which has been offered to me. I need not say that I shall do anything I can to render the working of the movement a success. And that was published in United Ireland, 27th of December 1884. I suppose one thing that strikes me here, and I'd invite others to chime in here, what Parnell's language is much more general. There's none of the specifics about what we're losing in, from old Ireland that Croke went into. There's none of the vitriol that Cusack would have been using. It's much more political language. I have no idea whether Parnell ever saw a hurling match or a football match. I sincerely doubt that he ever threw a hammer and things like that. He sees the GAA as a means of promoting Irish identity, as the others did. But I'm also mindful that Parnell in 1884, if I said had other fish to fry, I don't mean to be critical in that respect, but that he had his eyes on other prizes. Jarlath or
Kevin, well,
Julianne?
I mean, Cusack, for all his bluster, he was able to get Parnell and Maurice Davin, two major figures in Irish society, to become involved with the GAA. So he must have had something. I know we've been a little bit negative about him today, but he did manage to get two major figures in Ireland on his side, and of course Archbishop Croke.
And Archbishop Croke, yeah, that is true. Ger, like in late 1884, what's Parnell hoping for by being involved in this?
I think it's interesting, Kevin, that you mentioned the kind of political, almost diplomatic use of language. That there's no sense from reading this piece that it's that the GAA is a particular organisation of a particular type. What it does, I think, suggest is Parnell's great skill in associating himself with different strands of nationalism, as we saw him doing so skillfully in his engagement with the Fenians, with the Land League, and indeed with the GAA as well. I think you're right. I mean, his background would have been very different, one suspects, to that of Davin and Cusack and Croke in terms of how he would have engaged with Irish pastimes and games. But he does see the political importance of being associated with them at the same time. And I suppose in terms of his role afterwards, I think you mentioned it, Jarlath. To be fair to Cusack, it was some coup to get Parnell in as a patron, given his hugely popular status in the country at the time. And symbolically, it would have been a huge shot in the arm for the GAA. And again, he had Croke, the church, Davin, this legendary sports figure, David from the Land League, and Parnell from the political sphere. So you're right, I think, Jared. In a way, he showed great adroitness politically as well, maybe. In terms of the Parnell's role afterwards, as we know, in the late, and we talk about this in a moment, I think a bit more, in the late 19th century, the Fenian infiltration was something that would have concerned many of a home rule bent in the GAA, and that caused a lot of tension. And then subsequently, when Parnell's own downfall happened, shall we say, when there was that split, you did have sort of the IRB elements maybe sympathetic to Parnell, whereas the clerical element, and we had a great growth in the number of clerics and priests involved, would have had maybe less sympathy for Parnell. But perhaps one of the most salient lessons, to put it in a bit of context, of Parnell and Parnellism is that afterwards, the very painful split led to a decrease in number of clubs, it led to a decrease in affiliation. It definitely impacted the GAA significantly, as it did the whole country. It was a very painful time for the country. But it's interesting that in subsequent seismic developments, such as the volunteers split, the treaty split, the Civil War split, the GAA never split again. And one of its great, I suppose, attributes is how it kept people together at times of huge strife and division afterwards. And that's maybe the lesson that learned from Parnell.
Yeah, the Parnellite split is always used as a lesson, a salutary lesson. Liam O'Neill always mentions it, former president, that whenever we dabbled into party politics and took a position, that we never prospered from it. And you're right when you say, Gerard, that the number of clubs were decimated. I think we're down by 2/3, and there was a lot of lessons learned. Never become involved in specific political involvement.
And when the Home Rule Party reformed, the GAA reformed and reunited and regrew again in after 1900.
Yes. So we move on now to disputes and divisions, and I suppose that is as much a story of the GAA as it is anywhere else. And the GAA Museum has other material which might be relevant and useful. Kevin has sourced the following from the GAA People's History, that excellent book by Mike Cronin, Mark Duncan and Paul Rouse, that came out in 2009 for the 125th anniversary of the GAA, as the sources acknowledged as being from the GAA Museum. And it's Michael David warning Mr. O'Riordan of a possible split in the GAA on the 25th of August 1887. Julianne, do you want to just talk about that first?
Yeah, we have it here, and it's really exciting because I actually hadn't seen this letter until today.
You have it sitting on a cushion.
Yes,
yes.
Yeah, I don't think it technically needs that, but it looks very dramatic, so I quite like it. This one was in the archive, so as I mentioned, things come in and out. You can't leave them all exposed to light and temperature the whole time. But the fact that it's written by Michael David is pretty exciting, and we were looking at his handwriting earlier. It's quite similar in style actually to Cusack's, and you know the embossed lettering. All of that again is it's you know a look back in time and place, and to have this hugely famous a historical Irish historical figure have his correspondence is really exciting. And the museum, we're part of the Museum Standards Programme of Ireland, which is run by the Heritage Council, so that kind of gives you guidance on your care of your collections, and you're assessed hugely on everything in the museum every 5 years. We've one coming up actually, but the fact that we have that accreditation means that we can get loans from other museums that are accredited, national museums, and they know if we get something we'll care for it, or if we give them something on loan. So it's an interesting kind of background into when you walk into a museum. There's a lot going on that you don't know, and it's an interesting career choice for people who are interested in history as well, I think.
It is, of course. Thanks very much for that insight. Very interesting, Gillian. So maybe, Kevin, you might like to read it for us.
Yeah, I mean, David's handwriting is actually quite easy to decipher, which is not always the case with documents from the 19th century. But the piece I picked out was, can nothing be done to avert a crisis in the GAA? Efforts are being made to obtain from the patrons an expression of hostile opinion against the executive, and if these efforts succeed, there will be a split in the movement. This would be a calamity. What would you say to a suggestion of this kind? That while matters in dispute must be left for the GAA convention to deal with, could not a modus vivendi be found in the official or executive handicapper acting with the Freeman Club handicapper at the coming Freeman Club Athletic Festival? Very specific. Let me have your opinion of this suggestion, or any suggestion of your own, which would be likely to achieve the same end, namely peace until the convention in November. One of the things I suppose is this is the first document from David, excuse me, my apologies. And it strikes me that David had a different view again of the world as a patron of the GAA. By the way, we were talking about Cusack's skill in getting others involved. To get David and Parnell involved, because they were not best buddies by 1884. That harmony that was there at the time of the Land League and the New Departure had faded quite a lot at this stage, you know. But David actually agreed to become patron even before the meeting in Hayes' Hotel. He would quite possibly have been at the Hayes' Hotel meeting, and he sent an apology before it, you know. What struck me about David is that he had a particularly strong view of this new Gaelic Athletic Association as a means of linking to the diaspora, to the Irish in America, to the Irish in Britain, etc., because he himself had spent a lot of time and grown up in Britain, you know. He was the one, for instance, who suggested that this Gaelic Athletic Association should revive the Tailteann Games of ancient times. He was the one who suggested that that could be funded by sending a team of top sports people to America, which didn't work out very well. But in fairness to him, David was also the one who bailed out that failed American invasion of 1888 and gave £450 of his own money.
Which was a lot of money at that time.
Huge amount of money. And David went bankrupt afterwards, and he never got it back. He claimed he never got it back, and I believe that's the case, you know.
Yeah. And Ger, what was the main concern behind David's warning? And did it come to pass then?
There's a real sense, I think, Jared, in looking at that document, that there's something ominous afoot, and really it's not mentioned, but the growing infiltration of the IRB had become a major issue. And it's ironic, actually, because the well-known Fenian John O'Leary was loudly acclaimed as another patron of the GAA in 1886, and he was referred to by Davin as the fourth leaf in the clover, joining with representatives of the other nationalist strands. But what happened was very quickly that the extent of IRB involvement became quite dominant. You also had a radicalisation caused by the growth in evictions, the plan of campaign. There was a sense in which moderates were becoming more radicalised anyway. But in a number of really tumultuous meetings in 1886-87, the IRB exercised a kind of a grip on the Executive Council of the GAA. They made decisions increasing their power even in county committees. At one meeting, which Davin wasn't present at, and he was so furious he resigned subsequently, and it came to a head really in a convention of the GAA in Thurles, again, the symbolic home of the GAA, in November 1887, where hundreds attended. Many couldn't get access to the meeting. It took almost 2 hours to start, such was the level of contention there. And in the event, a Father Patrick Scanlon, notably again a cleric, led from the chamber those who were opposed to IRB dominance, and the following day, he almost had a parallel meeting, actually. The following day, Archbishop Croke expressed his serious concern about this so-called sinister influence, which led to, if you like, I suppose, a pulling back from the brink, whereby there was a compromise reached, and Davin was reinstated as president in 1888. The IRB influence was lessened, but what did happen is that at local level, in counties, in parishes, that tension still existed. Priests and bishops were opposed to the IRB, and in some cases then opposed to the GAA, and in some cases, including my own county of Cork, there were even more than one county board. So you did have that.
What do they call is the rebels?
Rebels for nothing, indeed. But there was that, I suppose, different layers of IRB infiltration, which remained a problem. And of course, as we know, when we move into the 20th century and the moves towards the further Home Rule crisis in 1912 and into 1916 and thereafter, the GAA was a major focus for republicanism. And
I'm sure that created difficulty for Crook as well, being involved so intimately with the GAA.
Of course, and you did have always that tension between Republicans and the Church, going back to the time of Cardinal Cullen and others, and a sense that the church did down the likes of the IRB and even Parnell. So there was that tension there. But at the same time, you had the hugely significant role of the church in the GAA. As we know, the organisation of clubs around parishes, where priests were very often leading figures in clubs. The introduction of games on Sunday, which actually alienated many Protestants, because for many evangelical Protestants, they couldn't play on Sundays. Priests allowed it for the GAA. And of course, the whole symbolism around even bishops throwing in the ball in finals afterwards, going back to Croke's mantle as the first patron. So you do have that kind of ambiguity almost in the relationship between the GAA and the church.
And he also mentions handicapping here as well. I think you've referred to it earlier about the difficulty that Irish people had with the whole English pastime of handicapping. And that led to gambling and other forms of things that maybe the Irish and particularly Cusack didn't like.
Yeah. I do think, though, in this instance, that handicapping was sort of the excuse for the row. The row was to do with what Ger has been talking about, you know.
Yes, and many times have we heard peace until the convention in November. That's been a theme running for the past over 100 years.
We couldn't possibly comment on that, Mr. President.
And then just one other quick point on it, Ger. You go back to 1798 and you go back to the Young Irelanders, and even in those, I suppose, those eras of Irish physical force or public activity, you did have an interest there in infiltrating sporting organisations as well.
So, Julian, there is no doubt we have an absolute treasure trove of material in the museum. We've only scratched the surface of it here. And one of them here is an interesting insight into the dynamics that existed between all of the main protagonists, Croke, Davin, Cusack, where we have the letter from Archbishop Croke to Maurice Davin regarding Cusack's criticism. Do you want to just enlighten us on that?
Yeah, this one's here in front of me as well, which is, it's great to have it. And you can see again in the style and the paper. I like that it's from the Palace in Thurles, it tells you at the top. And I suppose it's an indication that sometimes you don't have to say very much to make a very important point. And it's housed again on the ground floor of the museum, so you can come in and see it any day as part of that exhibition about our founders and the first patrons. So yeah, another really interesting one in the collection to finish on.
Kevin, do you want to read it for us?
Well, of course, yeah. It's very short. My dear Mr. Davin, I have seen your letter in this day's Freeman. That's the Freeman's Journal. This unpleasant affair has already gone far enough, if not too far. So in the name of God, let it be forgotten. Mr. Cusack did not weigh his words sufficiently, but we all know he would not deliberately insult me. Yours faithfully, T.W. Croke. We touched earlier on the background to this, that Cusack, in one of his fits of pique, had attacked Croke, and there had been a bit of argy-bargy, if I can use a modern term that we would use in games a lot, between the two in the press as well. And Croke decides, look, this is damaging everything. This is damaging the GAA, the messages and so on. So we need to calm things down. And what I like about it is that it's Croke seeing the bigger picture. It's Davin the peacemaker. The letter is to Davin, you know, will you help us, etc., etc. And again, it's the fiery Cusack, you know. So in a way, it encapsulates the three of them, you know.
So in modern parlance, really, when we started off with the podcast talking about they all set up the WhatsApp group, this would be a breakout group between the boys who are trying to create peace from the main WhatsApp group. Wouldn't that really be as close as you can get to the modern scenario?
Yeah, I was going to use a refereeing metaphor for Davin, but you know, you're right, yeah. Yeah, it's very similar.
So what does all of this then teach us about that time and about relationships and about this turbulent beginning that the GAA had?
Yeah, I suppose just one observation again, even sitting as we are in the surrounds of the Ard Coley Room in Croke Park, it's really humbling to think that you know, the extraordinary impact the GAA has made in Irish life and society has stretches back to this period and the tumultuous times in this period. And you know, for students of history, they'll know that around these events there were lots of really tumultuous things happening in terms of home rule, elections in 85 and 86, the whole culture revival, from which you mentioned earlier on as well, and all the sort of machinations of the ARB and all these things. And out of all of that sort of maelstrom of events and developments, the GAA came through and it endured and it remains a vibrant organisation. So I think it's just to look at the the beginnings of it. And the other thing that struck me just from the conversation that we've had today is maybe a more enhanced view of Cusack. He was a complex man. In many ways, he was his own worst enemy. It's sad in a way that he faded out of the organisation and then he came back into it again. And perhaps it's only after his death that his legacy has been really restored as a key figure, not only in the history of the Jaber in Irish history. And it's good that we can explore those things in relation to him. And a very final point from me on this, just the significance of being in the same room as some of these really seminal documents. And, students of history will consider different types of evidence and different types of sources, but to see the actual primary source letters that were written by these figures we've been considering, it's an extraordinary experience, and they remain such vital sources for us today as students and scholars of the period.
And it is interesting, I think, what you say, he was complex and his own worst enemy, which I think is kind, and it's important that we are kind to the person who founded the association and whose name, the stand opposite us, is named in honour of. What about yourself, Kevin?
Well, you'd also think that every sporting organisation needs a Cusack. There are people with drive who not everybody gets on with. They're not right all the time. They may not even be right most of the time. But that driving force is still a crucial part in anything, I wouldn't argue with anything Ger has said, but certainly what I'm leaving here with is the sense that I wish to God I had Julianne's job years ago. The excitement. It's like, for a historian to be in a room with documents, with actual real documents, like those documents, is incredible. It's like being in a sweet shop as a child. It's fantastic. We've only been looking at letters. There are so many other artifacts. There are so many other documents, be they adverts, RIC reports. There are so many things that can excite and can teach us more as historians or as students of history. That it's been a fantastic experience, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity, and particularly to Julianne for digging everything out for us and your insights into things.
It's really interesting to have the time in the day to go through these documents, and see, consider them for what they are, and it brings it to life. Like, there's a whole movement in museums at the moment to not be a grey, dull, boring building. It's a place of life. We have trails for children around to bring it to life for them, and when you see these documents in the museum setting, maybe beside some relevant objects like the Cusack letter, besides his blackthorn stick that you mentioned earlier, Charlotte, which was called Bás gan Sagart, Death Without a Priest. That's a great insight into what a personality he was, and I suppose it's fitting that the museum itself is housed in the Cusack stand. So, and he stands watch over us all every day when we're coming in.
And probably finally, the fact that we have these handwritten letters is very significant, because if you are going to now start looking for an archive starting today, it is all email, it is all text messages, it's Instagram, it's all of the modern methods in which we have of communicating. But you don't get the sense of the person's personality and their handwriting, which you get from actually having these documents which were, you're poured over, and the fingerprints of the person who actually wrote them on the piece of paper, which is so significant. So it's a real honour to have them here today. The GAA, as we know, sits at the heart of Irish life, and today is the focal point of communities all around Ireland and indeed across the globe. But as we've seen, its beginnings were humble and in the early days challenging, and as Ger said, even tumultuous. We owe a huge debt to those who founded the association and guided it through those difficult formative times. My thanks to Kevin and Ger for their insight, and of course to Julianne and the GAA Museum for safeguarding this remarkable history, and I have to say you did a great job of safeguarding it today. This has only scratched the surface. I'd encourage everyone to visit the museum and explore further. Speaking of exploring, this podcast is a collaboration with the Drumcondra Education Support Centre, and they have specially designed webinars available to help Leaving Cert students explore these themes in greater depth. The GAA History Podcast, Founding a Movement, was produced by Niamh Boyle and Cian Murphy for the GAA. Míle buíochas arís, go dté tú slán.